All right. Well, guys and gals in the Patreon, we have the privilege of having Dr. Charles Paxton with us. And I'm going to read a little bit of info about Dr. Paxton, and then he will tell me the stuff that I missed. So, Dr. Paxton is a research fellow from the University of St. Andrews, which is in the eastern side of Scotland, I believe. More specifically, he works for a called CREAM, which is a center of for research into ecological and environmental modeling. He also states that he is a aquatic biologist, occasional historian of science. Um, he's into things such as the Loch Ness monster, mermaids, merbeings, sea serpents, the kraken, and you may have seen his work on things such as the missing evidence, the Loch Ness monster for the Smithsonian Channel, the truth behind Loch Ness for National Geographic, the mythical beast for the Science Channel, the mysteries of the Museum of Loch Ness, all sorts of stuff. And he's got scientific papers that you could read for days, which look absolutely amazing. So thank you again for coming on, Dr. Paxton. I'm going to say right off the bat, it is 7 a.m. in Iowa, and the coffee has not kicked in yet, so it's gonna be fun. But is there anything that you would also like to add to so that the listeners would know about you, Dr. Paxton?
No, that seemed to cover it all. Yeah, I work as a researcher and also teach kind of critical thinking and stuff at the university here, which is the oldest university in Scotland, third oldest in the United Kingdom after Oxford and
That's so
Cambridge.
cool.
Yeah, so predates the United States.
For real, yeah, that's the story,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it blew us out of the water with that one. So yeah, Scotland. Eventually, I want to get over there because I am. That's my heritage. But so how does a guy? My question first is how. So you're into statistics, mathematics, um, this math stuff, and how are you also? You're somehow connecting this with cryptozoology. I'm getting this. There's this like sea monster, and there's this math connection. Like, what's the connection there?
Well, perhaps I should tell you a little bit about my career. And
Yeah, go ahead.
so,
Yeah, yeah.
so like when I was a boy, I would, like many people, probably many of your listeners, I was really really interested in sea monsters. I thought they were really really interesting, and all of this sort of thing. And then as I became older, I became well, I was always interested in fishes and marine life and things like this. So I went to college with the intention of becoming a fish farmer.
Mm,
Um, and but then I actually got into the science. I became really excited by the science, and I then became interested in fish behavior. I did my PhD in fish behavior, but in order to do my science properly, I thought I needed to really improve my knowledge of statistics. So I kind of acquired statistical knowledge, and I've ended up now I work in a maths and statistics department. But I've always kept my interest in the sea monster stuff I liked as a little boy, and I was kind of interested. I've always felt that the full scientific story behind that, it wasn't really being investigated. There were things that the skeptics were saying, there were things that the kind of believers were saying, and I thought actually there are a whole set of tools, and I still believe this. There are a whole set of tools we can use as ecologists, as statisticians, that can investigate these questions and produce original research that really asks questions: are the things that some people say that they see actually true? And what's the story behind that? And so my work kind of it's slightly different. I think my position is a bit different. I'm not really in the believer camp. I would say I'm not really in the skeptical camp either, because
okay.
I do think that some of the science actually doesn't reflect what some of the skeptics believe.
Mm.
Because interestingly, both the believers and the skeptics have fallen into the trap. They both assume that there's no science being done on their questions of interest, and so they don't bother looking for it. And so I see skeptical articles where you think, well, you haven't cited the recommended the available academic papers on this. I see believer articles where they do exactly the same thing, and so there are a few people like me in the middle who are going kind of, well, actually the science says this, which is a bit different to what both sides are talking about. So
Mm.
yeah, and I think there's a lot more work that can be done on this as well.
Wow, that is interesting. Very interesting. Um, let's I'm curious to know your thoughts on, is cryptozoology a science? What are your thoughts on that?
It's not a simple. I don't think it's a simple question. I
Hmm.
think, um, well, it kind of depends on what your definition of cryptozoology actually is. And
Sure.
well, I
Yeah.
prefer, of course, to use the definition of Bernard Hoovermans, who
Yep.
we might not be the originator of the term cryptozoology. He was certainly the person who can't define it in an academic way. And what did he call it? He said it was the science of hidden animals. And by hidden,
Right.
he kind of meant, as he later went on to say, controversial in space and time, that the range, the boundary of those animals was controversial in space and time. So maybe we're talking about things that are extinct or still alive today, or maybe we're talking about the existence of things whose existence is kind of debatable. Now, of course, that definition can be, you can investigate those, that in a scientific way. You can investigate that in a non-scientific historical way, but still in an academically rigorous way. But of course now, and again, this is a strange example where the kind of skeptics and the believers have kind of, some believers to be fair, have kind of converged on the same thing. There is this kind of idea that cryptozoology is everything about, it includes paranormality and lots of things like this, which of course
Right.
was an anathema to Hoovermans. But it's a weird collusion between, you see this on Wikipedia, between skeptics and believers who say it's all about paranormal animals. Well, I don't deal with paranormal animals because, as a scientist, the paranormal is, it's unparsimonious. It doesn't follow Occam's razor. You're generating extra entities, because as soon as you say there's a supernatural entity, then you've got to kind of explain physics, the physics of it,
Fascinating.
and all of this kind of thing. So that's,
Yeah.
so I'm a scientist. I think cryptozoology can be a science. It can be. It can be people doing kind of humanities as well. So they're not scientists, but they're still academically rigorous.
Oh, sure.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
um, and then of course there's kind of popular cryptozoology, which kind of could be scientific, but not necessarily is. So it's a complicated question with a complicated answer.
Yeah, but that is a very good overview. Like that's pretty awesome. Um, because if you think about it, it's like, man, the ocean is so big and so much of it undiscovered. What's not to say that, there's undiscovered creatures in the ocean out there. And I know, I mean, you're always seeing these photos of like out of uh the these crazy fish from the death with like, the lanterns hanging down. And I'm sure if there's these little fish, there's got to be bigger animals, fish out there that we just haven't seen yet. I mean, um there were one or two whales that were discovered this past year, correct? I believe I heard that. um
Yeah. Again, that's a complicated but really really interesting question. So the answer to your question is that yes, there are unknown animals out there. And in fact, I published a paper, when did I publish it? 1998, where I looked at the rate at which we're discovering new unknown animals in the sea. So at this point, your listener has got to use their mind's eye, but I'd like them to imagine a graph where on the x-axis you've got time over
okay.
hundreds of years, going back to the middle of the 18th century. So we've got time on the x-axis, and we've got the cumulative number of animals described on the y-axis. So modern biological naming starts in 1758 with the 10th edition of Linnaeus's Systema Naturae. And I think he had about 30 large marine animals greater than 2 meters in length, right?
Wow.
And then since that time, we've discovered more and more. And if you look at it, the rate at which, and if you now imagine the graph I pictured before, if you imagine a curve that's going up quite steeply in the 18th century, going up
Okay.
steeply in the 19th century, and then in the 20th century, it starts flattening off,
Oh.
right? It's flattening off. It hasn't flattened off.
Hmm.
Now, what we can do is we can take that curve and we can say, well, let's extrapolate that curve. And in other words, push it to the future and say, at what point will it level out? And the point at which it levels out, that tells us when we the total number, the ones that we'd expect, given the rate at which we're discovering things at the moment.
Okay.
And then if we can estimate that number, and then we can compare that number with the number of animals we've got at the moment, and the difference tells us gives us a way of estimating the animals awaiting discovery by science.
That's cool. Um, yeah,
So I
that
published
is
that as a
really okay.
paper
Yeah, yeah.
in '98, and it was completely ignored by the cryptozoological community, because here I was
Oh,
saying,
I
look,
bet. Yeah,
here we
yeah.
here we've got evidence, and the skeptics ignored it as well. Here we've got evidence that there could be some unknown animals. Now there's caveats. I made lots of simplifying assumptions there, which may not be met. And you were talking about deep sea animals,
Mm-hmm.
and of course there's a bias. We find all the animals that live at the surface, and we're still finding things further down in the sea. But the fundamental point of that paper was there are unknown animals out there. And I said, well, we'll probably discover new whales every 4 years or so. And lo and behold,
Mm-hmm.
we've discovered new whales every 4 years or so.
Right.
I say new, but some of them are kind of distinguished on molecular grounds from existing species. So they're not kind of new in the wholly new shape type way new, but they are new in the sense they are new species.
Mm. Very, very interesting. Have there been any recent discoveries in current years that have gotten you really excited of creatures that have been discovered?
Yeah, there was a massive ray discovered off Africa in the 1990s, which no one really talks about. It was like 2 meters wide, over two
Oh
meters
wow.
wide. Um, so, and even Hymantura, which is the big freshwater ray of Southeast Asia, that's a fairly big, hefty beast. I say categorically, there are large aquatic animals out there that we haven't discovered yet. There is absolutely no doubt about that whatsoever.
Mm,
And I say that on empirical scientific grounds. If you just look at the rate that we're discovering things, we clearly have not
yeah.
discovered everything. There are big animals out there. And that's a given. The question then isn't, are there big animals out there? That's a given. It's, are they being seen by people? And that's where I have to say
Yep, yep.
I'm kind of skeptical, because they're going to be deep down. They're going to be very rarely seen at the surface, and that's the thing.
That's awesome. To circle back to something, so just want to clarify for the audience. 2 meters is going to be around 7 to 8 feet, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Seven,
Okay.
1.8. Yeah, it's about 6 foot, 6 foot and 2/3.
Okay. Cool. Cool. That's
I
awesome.
think.
Um,
But that's just doing it in my head.
yeah, yeah, yeah. You're actually the first. I need to think for a second. You are the first uh person I have interviewed that not from the U.S. So it's very cool. And I'm actually interviewing. It's weird. It's kind of like UK Day. I'm interviewing Richard Freeman later today.
Oh, okay, yeah, I know Richard.
So that should be interesting as well. That's a little bit later on in the day. But um, when it comes to things like uh, the Loch Ness monster, mermaids and mer beings, things of that, the Kraken, like what? So, what is your favorite pieces of evidence that you could um, that you like to go to for saying that things like the Loch Ness monster could be a real creature? Is there anything that comes to mind or that you like to point to?
Well, when you say is it a real creature, it kind of depends what you really mean. Is it an unknown real creature, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. Sorry, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I've done quite a lot of analysis. We've got a
Mm-hmm.
paper just about to be resubmitted on this. I think the Loch Ness monster as a phenomena, and you have to. I'm very much against the idea of cryptids. I don't. That's not the scientific way of thinking about things.
Okay.
I'm. If you want to call me an expert, I'm not a Loch Ness monster expert. I'm a Loch
Mm-hmm.
Ness monster report expert. I know
Ah,
about the reports. That's the phynomena I can study as a scientist, because that's the
yes.
data. The
Okay.
data isn't Loch Ness monsters. So I'm currently doing a statistical analysis of reports from Loch Ness,
Mm,
um, and the statistical analysis kind of points to the idea that what's been generated in Loch Ness has multiple origins,
okay.
because different things are being reported. Loch Ness monster reports are not the same. They're not coming from. There's no evidence they're coming from one type of thing. They're not definitely not coming from one type of thing. They're being generated by lots of different things. Now the question then is, do any one of those or some of those represent an unknown animal? And I've got to say, probably not.
Mm,
We can
okay.
every type of report that we find in Loch Ness, we can think of a fairly plausible prosaic explanation for it.
Really? Okay. Do you mind
Yeah.
going into that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, many of these have been discussed already in the Loch Ness monster literature. Things like wakes,
Sure.
um, birds seen at a distance and they're misperceived, so their size is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Um, rotting vegetation that becomes buoyant and then wells
Right.
up at the surface and then goes
Yep.
down again.
Yep.
Um, debris, um, and the occasional big fish. It
Mm,
could be a sturgeon or even a school of salmon or something like that. So there could be all sorts of phenomena that happen on the log.
interesting. Yeah.
Um, so, I mean, obviously, there are always going to be reports which you can't, because I deal in the entirety of reports. I don't tend to deal, well, I have done it on occasion with specific reports. I can't deal with what does the whole phenomena tell us. Can we say about it statistically?
Mm-hmm.
So obviously there are reports from Loch Ness which, taken at face value, are kind of irreconcilable with um, prosaic explanations. But considered in entirety, then no, I don't think there's an unknown animal in Loch Ness. And there's good reason to think why that it wouldn't make sense on ecological grounds either. Loch
Okay.
Ness is it's a very big loch. That's absolutely fair to say it's a really, really big loch. But it's what we call an oligotrophic loch, which means it's low in nutrients.
Mm,
And this means, well, it's good in some ways, because what that means is oligotrophic environments are very favorable for salmonid fishes. So you do get migrating salmon coming through the loch. And of course, they're very popular amongst anglers. So
okay.
that's a good thing. But because it's an oligotrophic loch, this means that overall the abundance of fish is quite low. And so if I wanted a back of the envelope calculation on this, and other people have done ones as well, and it doesn't look as if there exists enough kind of fish, for example, assuming that Loch Ness Monster was a fish eater, to support a population of Loch Ness monsters. Now, biologists
Gotcha.
typically say that a minimum viable population where you don't get bottlenecks that could cause extinction would be, say, 30 or so individuals. And I reckoned when I did you'd be lucky if you had two, enough for two individuals in Loch Ness. That isn't to say that you do get predators coming to Loch Ness. You get occasional migrating grey seals coming into the loch, and possibly harbour seals as well. And they
Wow.
can, and obviously they're predators, but they're not 30-foot long monsters. They're
Right. Yeah.
small little things. Um,
That is very interesting. So you said it would have to be 30 individuals. Would that also I know I mentioned before that there was a question and we'll try to weave it in here. Um, is that going to be similar to what the answer would be for, how many of these creatures would it take to maintain like a healthy breeding population, or is there any math that can be done um, behind that? Or
Yeah, I'm not that familiar with the theory behind it, but basically, if you've got a population of 30, you expect it to fluctuate. All populations will fluctuate,
okay.
just with standard kind of statistical noise. And of course, if they hit zero, or if they hit two and the two of the same sex,
Hmm.
then
Right.
you don't get reproduction, assuming there's no migration happening in and out of the loch. And we don't really think there is, because um, well, until the building of the Caledonian Canal, there wasn't a deep enough river for a big 30-foot monster to.
Oh
There is a
yeah.
river, but it's really shallow, and so people have seen it coming through a major city, Inverness, into the loch. So I don't think
Okay.
you can say Loch Ness monster is migrating. Um, so we're talking about a stable population, which which fluctuates such that it never ever goes extinct over hundreds of years. Well, yeah, theory suggests it should be 30 or so,
That's
because that
that's
would
really
fluctuate. Sometimes there'd
interesting.
be 15, sometimes there'd be 45, sometimes there'd be go down
Uh,
to 8. And as soon as you start having very low numbers, there's a chance that things won't reproduce, and then the
hmm.
population goes extinct.
Interesting. Oh, that's cool. I like that. That's really cool. I can see how math definitely plays an important role in into this research that you did. It's pretty cool. I was looking through your website, c-monster.info. That's the one, right?
Yeah.
Um, and there was a line that you had in there that I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on. It says you're looking into how big certain marine megafauna can get. Um, can you offer any insight onto that statement? That because when I think of megafauna, I'm thinking like, you've got your North American, like the elk that are like super huge back in the ice age with the big antlers and everything. So, but this applies to sea creatures then.
Yeah. So again, you can use statistics to answer these sorts of
Okay.
questions. So one question I've been interested in, I published a paper on this, quite a controversial paper actually. Yeah,
Hmm.
was all about how big giant squid
Oh,
grow, and so giant squid. We don't know much about giant squid. We've got a few hundred specimens of giant squid, and in the past, in the 19th century, people seem to be suggesting that giant squid grew quite large. And I was kind of interested in this question. So I kind of did some various plots of the different proportions of body sizes in giant squid, um, and then considered standard statistical measures of uncertainty associated with that. And I was kind of surprised to find out that the giant squidologists, the malacologists who are interested in squid, they kept on saying things like, well, we know giant squid don't reach greater than what are they saying, 20, 30 foot.
okay.
And in fact, if you consider the problem statistically, that didn't appear to be the case at all. It appeared to be that we really don't know because we haven't sampled many specimens. And if you take into account that uncertainty, I was really quite surprised. Giant squid could grow really quite large indeed.
Wow.
And that was quite controversial amongst the giant squid workers because they've been quite conservative in their interpretation because they said, well, the biggest we've seen is this. But of course, the population of giant squid, we've measured about 450 specimens of giant squid.
Okay.
The guesstimate minimum population size of giant squid worldwide is 100,000. And that's a minimum because we know
Hmm.
that, for example, large numbers of them being eaten by sperm whales every year. And for them to be
Okay.
sustainable on that basis, there's got to be a lot out there. So
Yeah.
we just sampled 450 out of a population of 100,000. There's going to be some giants there. The idea that we've got the
Right.
biggest giant squid in our sample of 450,000 out of a minimum of 100,000 is ludicrous. And that's all I was kind of saying, really, and just sort of backing that up with statistics. And I was critiqued by some malacologists, well, one, who said, well, maybe the sizes that were given from the 19th century literature were exaggeration. So I redid the analysis, not including the 19th century ones, and you still get the same answer. So,
Hmm.
to the best of our knowledge, it's quite possible there are giant squid of really quite large sizes out there. Not 100-footers, that's crazy. But well, people have reported them, but I'm skeptical. But maybe 60 foot. But remember, for a giant squid, their tentacles are really quite stretchy. So you
Okay.
could have
Oh,
quite a
yeah.
small body
Yep.
and quite long tentacles. So I'm not necessarily. I was slightly misquoted. People were saying that there was some commentary on the paper said that giant squids grew to the size of school buses, and they meant North American school buses, not British school buses, which are a standard yellow ones, I believe.
Is
But
there
that
like a
is,
is there a huge difference?
well, yeah, because
Okay.
well, sometimes they could be double-decker buses in
Oh,
Britain
yeah, yeah, yeah.
on
Okay.
all
Yeah.
sorts of stuff. But you have these like standard yellow ones, like, well, that's what I've seen from Stranger Things and those sorts of things.
Oh, yeah. And I'm going
American
off of
children's
Harry
don't.
Potter, so
Yeah,
it
yeah,
goes both ways. Yeah.
yeah. So people said, well, some of the popular articles said, oh, they grow as big as giant squid, but that, of course, as American school buses. But that made people think that the body was as big as American school bus.
Oh,
But
right.
the bodies don't grow as big as American
Yeah.
school buses. That would be a ginormous giant squid.
Yeah, it would.
But maybe to 3 meters in terms of body length, maybe an extra half meter for the head.
Mm.
That would be that. So the chunky bit of body would be pretty big, but probably not going beyond that. very much.
Very cool. That is cool.
So again, you see, it's one of these cryptozoological questions actually can be answered using statistics to produce
Yeah,
answers which
totally.
kind of don't really fit in with the paradigms of kind of either side. But the science is there. You just have to kind of look for it and think about it, and all of this kind of stuff.
I mean, it makes me want to later today do some research on if this same type of thinking has been applied to like you know, Bigfoot in North America, like if there can be a sustaining population, if it has this supposedly like this amount in of space in the Pacific Northwest, like that might be something interesting to look into, I think.
Yeah, I don't know the Bigfoot literature at all. I mean, I know that there's been a little kind of statistical work done. There's a guy called Fahrenbach, I think it is, who
Okay.
did some work on footprint, the distribution of footprint sizes, which was kind of fun. I didn't necessarily, I read his paper, I didn't necessarily agree with the conclusions, but I like the basic idea of kind of investigating Bigfoot footprint sizes. Given,
Mm,
again, my argument would be this is the data.
right.
The
Yep.
data are reports, or in the case of Bigfoot, they're reports and footprints and maybe calls. And again, you can do statistical kind of things with them. And Jeff Meldrum, I mean, he's kind of
Oh yeah.
taking a similar approach. I've never actually spoken to him in person, but I mean, he's kind of taking a similar approach. Um, so again, you can investigate Bigfoot as a reported phenomena and draw conclusions about it as a reported phenomena. And that would be the scientific approach. And because
Hmm.
we don't know Bigfoot, the scientific community doesn't accept that Bigfoot exists. What the scientific community cannot doubt at all is that Bigfoot exists as a reported phenomena. And so it's
Yeah, true. True.
perfectly legitimate for a, well, in theory, for a scientist to come along and say, I'm going to do analysis of Bigfoot reports.
Mm.
Now, funny enough, I've approached once or twice. I have approached uh, various organisations in the United States about doing this, and they've kind of they just ignore my emails.
Oh
Um,
really?
yeah, which I found kind of weird because you think people would be enthusiastic about scientists actually kind of taking a look at their data, but they did. Um,
Oh, it's too bad.
yeah,
Mm.
because I think there are some interesting things that could be said about
Mm-hmm.
things from the reports. I mean, one phenomena, whether or not you accept Bigfoot exists, and we know this from work I've done in the sea monster stuff, is that there are sociological trends in what people report.
Mm.
And we see this in sea monsters. I'm pretty damn sure you would see it in Bigfoot as well, where there'll be changes in what people report through time.
Oh yeah, totally.
Even if the phenomenon was real, even if the underlying phenomenon is real, there would be changes in what is reported through time as cultural input changes the emphasis on what people think is important to report from a report. If you see what I mean. So it
Oh
could
yeah,
be
that's
that
cool.
um, 40 years ago, people just said it was a big ape, right? But
Mm-hmm.
they didn't bother kind of explaining it. But maybe now we'd be more sensitive to issues like how does it smell or something like this. There could be just like subtle things like this would just be more likely to be reported now than we'd
Mm.
be likely to report it at other times. I want to
Totally.
give you an example of that. I mean, until 10, 15 years ago, everybody reported ape-like Sasquatch, right? It wasn't, and now there's people talking about um, wolf-headed Sasquatch and stuff, right?
Right. You've got like, well, the dog man. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Now,
get what you mean. Yeah. Yeah. Totally. Yep. It does
okay,
kind of
what's
evolve.
going
Yeah.
on there? Well, why has that suddenly arisen? Well, I'm kind of
Yeah.
saying, well, that's a sociological thing. That's not a, you're not telling me that I mean that there were wolf-headed Sasquatch 50 years ago. No,
That's
yeah,
so,
I mean,
I've not,
if it
yeah,
was
that's
even if it was a
interesting.
supernatural phenomena, there should be
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
wolf-headed Sasquatches 50 years ago,
Oh
but there
man.
weren't. So that's sociological.
Right.
Um,
That'd be cool too.
so, and again, well, this wouldn't be the job for a scientist. Perhaps this would be a job for a social scientist to come along and go,
Right.
okay, what are the trends in these reports? Um,
Mm. That's cool.
yeah, and so
That's
there's
cool.
loads of work that could be done. That could be academically rigorous work on this phenomena. You just have to move away from the idea that well, you don't start with the premise. It's the cryptid is the thing you're studying. You're studying the evidence. That's the thing you're studying. It's the evidence. It's the reports. It's the footprints. It's the calls. That you study. That's the tangible thing you can study. And then there is actually a name for this. They call it reification. It's where you've kind of moved the hypothesized thing, the Bigfoot, to being the object of study. Now the Bigfoot is the hypothesized thing from the point of view of scientists, maybe not, of course, from people who've seen it. But the thing that definitely does exist is the thing that we can study, and that's reports. I'm a one-track pony on saying this, but
no, that's cool.
It's not something that's out there which people are thinking about, but it's so important to kind of to bring this out, because that's the way. If you want cryptozoology to be accepted by academics, you've got to study the stuff which is studyable, and that's the evidence.
It sounds exactly like Cliff Barackman from Washington, from the North American Bigfoot Center, and he's like, we gotta focus on the evidence. You know, it's like, stop telling me the stories where it's like, oh, I saw Bigfoot and he had, you know, he was on his way to a picnic. Like, tell me the actual like stuff that you can observe. You know, like the footprint size, did you see hair, stuff like that. And that's all me paraphrasing, but that's pretty much what he's saying is very similar to you.
I did come across a report by a group called the North American Ape Conservancy.
I bet it was North American Wood Ape.
That's the thing. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
NAWAC. Yeah, out of
And
Oklahoma.
I like their approach. I like their kind of
Exactly
empirical. We're going to try and study this. Maybe it'll be fruitless. Maybe it won't be fruitless. But I like you can't deny that their approach is scientific. They are.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Yeah. They're making an effort. I like their approach. I thought that was kind of cool.
Going back to sea monsters, in more things that you've been studying on, what would be well, I guess there's two different ways. So what are your goals for 2021? Do you have any goals regarding like doing more mathematical formulas to try to figure out new things regarding your study, or would you like to see certain things come out regarding this field of sea creatures? Or
well, I've got a number of papers coming out. Well, they're under review, so I can't say they're going to come out. But obviously, we have to go through peer review and everything. Got a big statistical analysis of Loch Ness monster reports, what they mean.
oh wow.
And once that one's out, there's a whole series of papers that come after that one, which explore, which do exactly what I was talking about before. Explore the Loch Ness monster phenomena as a sociological phenomena, and looking at how changes and what's been reported through time have fluctuated according to basically how people were collecting the data. So this is the other issue. So you have different organizations collecting data at Loch Ness, and what's reported at Loch Ness varies depending on who's collecting the data. Not because they necessarily had an agenda. Well, many people had an agenda in the sense they wanted to prove the existence of the Loch Ness monster, but the way in which they collected the data was different. And so, for example, in one particular point in time where one organization is working on Loch Ness, you see a large number of reports being generated of a certain type. And we know why they're being generated. It's because they were collecting data in a particular way. And so there's some work on that coming out. There's some other stuff. I don't want to go into too many details to give out things, but there's there's a certain way in which the Loch Ness monster is sometimes reported, which is biologically impossible. And when that's reported, so the question is, what does it mean when people report this thing, which actually they could not possibly have reported? It'd be literally impossible for them to report the thing that they're actually reporting on biological grounds and also on physical grounds. How often is this particular thing reported? And so there's a paper on that coming up. And that will become clear when the paper comes out. You'll understand what I'm talking about there. But I don't want to talk about.
We don't want to give anything away because those are hard to put together and get a peer reviewed and all that. I would imagine we don't want
to. Yeah. And there is prejudice. I've been I know people often say, believers often say of scientists that they're kind of prejudiced against their work, and
Hmm.
actually I think that is partially true, because I know that because I have I have normal non cryptozoological related stuff that I do, and it doesn't go through, it doesn't get rejected half as much as my cryptozoological work gets rejected.
Oh, that's funny.
And I
Yeah, I
think
bet.
sometimes it's reached a stage now where I have to kind of, and I don't like writing this because I feel it kind of prejudges the assumptions, where I've actually had to say, we are not seeking to prove the existence of the Loch Ness monster, because that's not our agenda
Mm,
with the papers that we're writing. But people, it's quite clear from the reviewers that they assume that the very fact we're writing a paper on this
mhm.
assumes that we believe it, which doesn't, from my perspective, doesn't link at all. There's no reason why you can't, because like I said, I'm studying the evidence associated with the Loch Ness monster. I'm not so we're not claiming the Loch Ness monster exists. If I thought I had evidence for that, I would submit a paper that said that. But the moment I haven't got evidence for that. So,
Mm.
and I do. So I think the prejudice is there. I don't like to say that because I'd like to feel that my scientific colleagues are completely objective and everything like this. I mean, and I do think that even if someone found evidence of Bigfoot, like proper biological evidence of Bigfoot,
Yeah.
they might find that difficult. They might find that difficult to publish. Actually, it
Mm.
certainly it would be subject to extreme scrutiny,
Oh,
rightly
yeah.
and properly so. Um, they'd have to. I mean, the actual reality is, if you want to produce peer-reviewed science publications in cryptozoology, they've got to be better than normal scientific papers, because they will receive that extra bit of criticism and scrutiny.
Interesting.
Um, uh, Partially, I understand that, because as a skeptical cliche goes, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So you're
Hmm.
going to have to
Yep.
put your data up for scrutiny. But it's kind of hard. I mean, when you get your paper knocked back, when you think this is
Yeah,
a
that
good
would be
sound paper,
frustrating. Yeah.
because I know my stuff. I'm not, everything is kind of, every point is like justified in terms of the statistics or previous work and all this kind of stuff. So you do kind of get a bit frustrated, but it's in the nature of science. You've got to take it on the chin and
Well, yeah.
carry on
Right.
pulling those
Um,
levers out.
so regarding your way of applying mathematics to, the study of sea creatures, etc. Are there? I know that a lot of your work is definitely in scientific papers, as it should be. Are there any books that are similar to that that you would recommend for the listeners to read if they want to dive deeper into this, or is it
Yeah,
more
well,
like you need to get into scientific papers?
no. I mean, this book I kind of like, which if you
Okay.
kind of this is actually the guy I co-authored with. So this is well, your listeners won't be able to see this. I've just plugged this from my bookcase, which is next door. It's called Hunting Monsters by Darren Naish.
Oh
Um,
yeah, I want to talk
and
to him someday. He's really cool.
yeah, so I mean, I've
Yep.
collaborated with him,
Okay.
and I think in many ways our opinions on these matters are pretty similar. We disagree
Hmm.
about some things, but uh, we certainly, I think we probably agree about most things. But he, like me, he accepts the idea that you don't have to believe in cryptozoological animals to find it's a fertile area of study. But I mean, like all of us, there's a secret. I think there's a secret bit of him that wants to wish that these animals did actually exist. But in the marine context, undoubtedly there are odd things out out in the sea. Terrestrial cryptozoology, which I know nothing about. It's an uninformed opinion. I'm a bit more skeptical about,
Right.
but I wouldn't claim to be an expert on Bigfoot and stuff. I've never done the legwork on that.
I think it was an interesting side conversation, definitely. But Dr. Paxton, thanks so much for coming on.
Sorry,
Halfway through your day. Yeah. Oh yeah.
can
Go
I
ahead.
just
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
one
Yeah.
thing?
Please.
Um, I just want to make something clear that, perhaps
Yes.
from my perspective, and that is about witnesses.
Mm.
And I don't want people to come away from this discussion thinking that I doubt the lived experiences of witnesses.
Okay.
My view on I study reports, and my view on reports is that the witnesses are truthful unless I have evidence to the contrary,
Mm.
and that's really important. what I would claim is that perhaps they've misinterpreted what they've seen. But my default, and I think it should be the default for anybody who does this kind of stuff, is that people are telling the truth.
Okay.
So I just wanted to people out there. So you can be skeptical without denying the experiences that people have actually had. I just wanted to kind of to stress that.
That's a good
There are
clarification.
hoaxes
Thank
and
you.
liars out there, but I don't think they're the majority. And yeah, I just wanted to kind of put that one out.
Awesome. What would you say the best way for if people are like, man, I really like what this guy is doing? What would be the best way they can follow your work and things of that nature?
Well, there's c-monster.info. That's
Mm-hmm.
CSEA, which is my website where I publish details of my papers. On Twitter, I'm what's my Twitter handle? Charles Paxton 4, I think.
I think you're right. Yep.
I occasionally post about new publications there and other occasional crazy thoughts. Occasionally feeble attempts at humor, things like that. Yeah, so that's probably how people can find out about stuff. And every so often I appear on television, but that varies quite a lot.
Gotcha. Wow, thanks for coming on and chatting for my audience for a bit. I mean this is probably going to be the most amazing bits of content scientific wise that we've had so far, and I really appreciate you sharing everything that's on your mind regarding it. It's very cool. Thank you for coming on.
Well, thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk.
Have a great rest of your day, Doctor.
Okay.